Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Unlimited YouTube channel. I am your host for at least for this video, Tyler Harper. I know you guys are used to seeing our old friend Matt Meffy, but it is hockey season yet again. Yes, end of September, preseason well underway, training camps are going. Might be tough to get caught up because obviously it's football season, baseball playoffs are right around the corner, but here we are tonight focusing part one of our NHL preview. And of course, I'm saying I'm saying we because, since we're talking hockey, I've got to be talking to your friend and mine all the way out there in Western Canada, out in Edmonton. Brett Lipke, sir, how are you doing?
I am good. It's not quite freezing up here in the north. Not quite.
Oh, that's good.
It was getting close, and then now we're going to get we always get a nice little bit, and then, but within a few weeks, hockey season comes, the snow is going to come, the ice, it's just going to be terrible. It's going to be very cold, minus 30,
Oh,
but hey.
oh, I'm sure, and that's actually kind of funny considering here right now where I am in southern New Jersey, right just outside of Philadelphia. It's been around 90 degrees the past few days.
Yeah,
And I don't
that's
get it.
unfathomable. I don't even like that much heat, but really it's
I
September.
don't like that heat at the end of September. Like, I like that it's nice, but because there were some days where the humidity was just, like, it was almost gross to be outside. We're like, no, like, this is supposed to be weather. Leaves are supposed to be falling. But trust
Yeah.
us, guys, it's hockey season. It's all the other, like, football and basketball is going to start up soon, too. But again, we're focusing here tonight on hockey. And this will be in Brett Licky's wheelhouse because we're talking tonight about the Western Conference. We're going to save the Pittsburgh Penguins, two-time Stanley Cup champion Pittsburgh Penguins. We're going to save them and the rest of the Eastern Conference for tomorrow night. Around this time, maybe a little earlier. Keep an eye on Facebook and YouTube and all that good stuff. So, Brett, you ready to talk some hockey?
I am always ready to talk some hockey. Let's get into it.
I should know better than to ask a Canadian if they're ready to talk hockey.
It's what we live on. It's if there was a hockey
Pretty
sort
much.
of fluid that you could inject into us, that's us. Like, we're just constantly on the brain.
I thought
This
that was called
city,
Tim Hortons coffee.
that is true. People would have that by the IV. I'm surprised at Rogers Place that wasn't one of the things, that they just had IV drips from the ceilings that you could get your Tim Hortons while you watched your Oilers.
I mean, hey,
Jeez.
like, you guys found ways to make that building loud in the playoffs.
Oh, always. And we talked about it. Actually, the last time we talked, we did a playoff preview, and that was that next night. Went to the first game at Rogers Place, first playoff game there, first playoff game in 10 years in Edmonton, and it was absolutely insane. Awesome summer, or spring, I guess I should say, and that's why I'm ready to talk hockey right there.
Mm-hmm. All right, and we will get to Brett's Oilers in a little bit because we'll talk about his Oilers just like tomorrow night. We'll probably talk about my Flyers. So, but since we're talking Western Conference, we got to talk about the new team in town. We kind of talked about it a lot when we were doing those playoff and Stanley Cup previews about how the expansion draft was going to kind of turn the league on its head. But here we are, and the Las Vegas Golden Knights exist. They have their roster. They have their preseason well underway. They're at the T-Mobile Arena out in LA, and they're pretty much ready to go. And when people ask about, oh, the Vegas Golden Knights, how are they going to do this year? The response from everyone is pretty much, meh, because they're an expansion roster. It's the same thing that happened when I believe the last expansion was the Blue Jackets and Wild, no?
Yeah, that would be the last. It was right in 1999, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when those two teams started, they were very much middle of the road at best. But they knew going in that they had to build through not only the draft but through free agency, through trades. It's going to be an interesting process for the team that's out there playing hockey in the desert.
Well, one of the things with Vegas was they had a little bit of an advantage. Now, this expansion draft wasn't as lucrative as they probably could have made it for the Vegas Golden Knights, but it was still a lot better than it was in years past. I mean, teams have passed. You look at some of those expansion teams and wasn't pretty. One that jumps to mind, early 90s, Tampa Bay Lightning, Ottawa Senators. Ugly, ugly, ugly rosters. This was a little bit better. Now, one of the things was that there were some good players that were left unexposed on the expansion draft day. If you remember that, there were some decent players that didn't get taken. Now, Vegas got those draft picks for them so that they wouldn't take those, those certain players. I believe Anaheim, I can't remember the defenseman right now that they left. I believe it was Cam Fowler that they left unprotected.
Yeah, I think it was Fowler.
Yeah, but at the expense that it was, okay, but we'll pay you however many draft picks it was. I thought that Vegas could have maybe got a little bit more, but one of the things that it signals was that they were willing to take less of a powerful roster now to build for the future. And I don't know if you've been watching. Have you seen any Tyler Wong so far?
No.
Tyler Wong, I'm telling you, if you're a Vegas Golden Knights fan, this season might be ugly. Well, probably will be pretty ugly. But Tyler Wong makes the team, looks very promising. Young talent. He might be the lone beacon of what probably would just be a, like you said, meh season.
Yeah, and you talk about that too. Like, you talk about how his name's escaping me right now, but is McPhee the general manager's name?
Yes, George McPhee.
Yes, George McPhee. That's right. I mean, because keep in mind, like, once those protected rosters came out, basically, he was holding the league hostage, more or less. Like, at that point, like, all the teams could do is release their protected roster, be like, well, let's see what he does. The Vegas social media, which, if you're not following them on social media, Twitter, whatever, do it. Click that follow button. Not only are they hilarious taking shots at teams like the Penguins, the Kings, etc., but they also are doing a good job of actually keeping track of this team. Like, pretty much throughout, like, the morning when those protected rosters were released, like, they, like, picked up McPhee, like, he got into his car, like, there were, like, cameras on him, and he was talking about how, like, kind of nervous he was. He goes in. There was a video, professionally done video put up of him, like, taking all the printed out rosters and just being like, all right, let's go, boys, because he knew for the next couple days he had the NHL more or less in his hands. There was a trade freeze. Other teams couldn't make moves. Free agency hadn't started yet. So McPhee was pretty much running the show at that point, which was kind of bizarre in a way, but it added an interesting element to this offseason. And looking at this roster, yeah, there are some notable names at least, and like, you have guys like Riley Smith, guys like James Neal, guys like Cody Eakin, on defense like Derek Englund, Braden McNabb from the Kings. And of course, your starting goaltender is going to be Marc-Andre Fleury, who obviously has the rapport. He's a multiple-time Stanley Cup champion in one way or another. But other than those big names, you're going to be curious to see what these younger guys can do, because for a lot of times, they're going to have time to shine this year. It's going to be interesting to see how this roster really meshes and to see what their ceiling could actually be.
Yeah, like I said, it's a little bit hard to forecast because, I mean, like any expansion draft roster, it's just a cobbling, like you said, but probably not too pretty, but there will be some moments. Like Marc-Andre Fleury, he's still serviceable. He'll be fun to watch here and there. He'll throw in some good games here and there that steals the team a win. And James Neal, fun player too. So it's not completely dark in the desert, and there'll be some young talent bubbling under, and they'll keep it fun. The excitement of a brand new team lasts for a couple seasons anyways before there starts to become some heavier expectations. So they've got time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like, it's not going to be like the NBA where teams are going to like just bottom out and then they're going to get the first pick every year. Like, no, like, they'll at least be like somewhat competitive. Yeah, they'll probably be lower end, probably around where the Colorado Avalanche are going to be this year. But nevertheless, they'll have some fun games. They'll have some cool moments. And I'll be curious to see like how the fan base really reacts to Vegas, because everyone's been wondering like what happens when you put a professional team in Vegas, which, I mean, when you think Vegas, you think more about like the sports gambling aspect of it rather than sports teams. But now, not only are they getting a hockey team this year, but also Oh yeah, in a couple years, the Raiders are going to be down there for the NFL.
Exactly. There's it's an exciting time to be in Vegas and
One could
deservedly
argue
so.
it's always an exciting time to be in Vegas, but
This is very true. It is always an exciting time to be in Vegas. Sometimes it's a little crazy, but it's always
yeah.
exciting. But yeah, no, it's a good thing. It's good for hockey. I think I was one of the people who actually kind of liked the move. I don't think it's too bad. And it'll be, you know what? At the very least, it'll be worth watching. You know, some of these games, if they're on TV, you got to catch it because, hey, it's Vegas. So,
hmm Yeah, and that's absolutely it. So everyone, again, not expecting much from the Golden Knights, but we'll see what happens. That's pretty much going to be the motto this year. Like, if I'm the Vegas PR guy, I use that as my slogan right away. Just, we'll see what happens.
yeah, Tyler
Anyway,
Wong. Watch Tyler Wong. He'll be the highlight.
all right, I'll pen that name down. And now let's move on from the new guys in the league, well, new team in the league, to the defending Western Conference champion uh, Nashville Predators, which kind of came out of nowhere because if you remember way back to when Brett and I did our playoff predictions, we were like, yeah, they'll put up a fight, but Chicago's probably going to win out like they always do. Boy, were we wrong. Not only sweeping the Chicago Blackhawks, but going all the way to, I believe it was Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals against the defending champion Pittsburgh Penguins, and showing that, hey, guess what? They deserve to be there. So obviously in the West, all eyes are going to be on Nashville because uh, for the past couple years they've kind of been building up their identity. Before the season started, of course, it's crazy to think that was only a year ago that they made that huge trade to get PK Subban from the Montreal Canadiens in exchange for Shea Weber. That whole day was really just a stunner of a day in the NHL. But Nashville gets PK Subban, who really helps elevate that team. And now it's going to be interesting to see how they react to having the bullseye on their back because they kind of had the luxury of being that 8 seed and pulling off the upsets and getting the momentum. And pretty much like all like the people who didn't have a horse in the race, like myself, were kind of drawn to Nashville. Like, okay, they're the 8 seed, they're the underdog, similar to the Kings a few years back. Like, it's kind of cool to see the 8 seed kind of run the table and either go all the way or almost go all the way. But now there's going to be a lot more national eyes on Nashville being like, okay, like this roster, it hasn't really changed much. So they could have a pretty much a repeat season and be towards the top of the West in the regular season.
Yeah, Nashville, one of the things last year was they got off to a rocky start, if you recall, where inconsistency plagued them. And for a chunk of the season, they were out of a playoff spot. And it could have either went either way. Luckily, though, for the Predators, the roster started to blend. They got some big performances. PK Subban, who battled a couple tiny little injuries throughout the season, ended up having a fantastic debut season for the Predators. Pecorine, who had some question marks going into that season. Well, he answered them. He had a really good regular season, especially strong at the end, which helped will the Predators to get actually into the playoffs. But even better was his performance in the playoffs, where he was posting something like a .930 save percentage. So coming off of that, I'm sure Pecorine is going to be feeling really good about himself. And he's a big piece to that puzzle in Nashville. And if he keeps firing at the level he did last year, like I said, that roster relatively unchanged. They're going to come out and they're going to be they won't be finishing 8th this year. Let's put it that way. They'll be a true contender for the top in the Central Division. I'm sure of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, really like the main addition getting from those champion Pittsburgh Penguins, Nick Bonino now wearing the yellow of the Predators as opposed to the black and yellow of the Pens. But really, the main thing they lost, at least looking up and down on this roster, is the fact that, I mean, their captain, Mike Fisher, retired. But other than that, this roster pretty much the same. You have some key pieces in Arvidsson, Kevin Fiala, who had a pretty good year, Ryan Johansson, who signed a new extension, so he'll be ready to go. Of course, he had that very kind of scary, uneasy injury in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Guys like Austin Watson, and of course PK Subban and new captain Roman Josi, Matthias Ekholm for them on defense. This roster, yeah, it still looks pretty good. Like you look up and down, and you see that, yeah, like we mentioned, not really any differences from the roster that made it all the way to the Stanley Cup. So if they all come in with that unfinished business attitude, which I don't see why Peter Laviolette wouldn't be preaching that message, guess what? It would not surprise me, like we said, to see the Preds as not only in the playoff picture, but as a top 2 or 3 team in the West this year.
Exactly. That defense, I mean, Calgary's getting a lot of talk about their D, which we'll talk about as being the best in the West. But do not forget about Nashville. I mean, Nashville, this D core, and like I said, Yosi's the new captain. I mean, everything to love. As long as Pekka Rinne doesn't have a down year, he's over the last couple of 4 years, posts a strong season, then he dips, posts a strong season, then he dips. As long as he doesn't dip this year and start letting in those bad, poor confidence goals that can sometimes sink a team, lots to love here in Nashville. And that's good. I said this last year, actually, at the start of the playoff preview. Nashville's an excellent hockey market. He's one of the
100%.
state's best hockey markets. And the more success Nashville has, the better for the league entirely. Look at how crazy that playoffs was. I mean, that whole city got behind him. The country music scene got behind him. I mean, the Predators were Nashville's team. So,
Yeah.
yes,
No,
keep it up.
like, yeah, you mentioned like that fan base just raucous, and it's funny like how they had like their own like little chant things, the whole things
Yeah.
like Murray, it's all your fault. It's all like it's refreshing. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's almost like kind of like the big like fan sections at like a soccer match. I mean, you see
Yeah.
in like MLS and obviously in Premier League and other things like these raucous fan sections that have their own chants, and when they get going, they don't shut up. And that's,
Mm-hmm.
believe me, Nashville, that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. That building is intimidating to play in, the Bridgestone Arena. So yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to topple the defending Western Conference champions, but other teams are going to try. One of those other teams, Brett, you mentioned them, so let's make the natural segue. The Calgary Flames. Now, of course, blah, 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 they just have the recent issues with Gary Bettman, blah, 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 Gary Bettman,
The
whatever, blah, blah,
Seattle
blah. Point
Flames. The
is,
Seattle
the
Flames.
Seattle Flames, oh no. I don't want to see the Seattle Flames. I like Calgary where they are. But you mentioned, in all seriousness, they still have a hockey team, and you mentioned their defense as being an elite core. And yeah, it's hard to argue with guys like Michael Stone, Dougie Hamilton, Mark Giordano, their captain, TJ Brody. Uh, these guys are just, I mean, 1 through 6, whichever 6 they choose to dress for a game, are going to be tough to deal with. And add in, oh yeah, they've got a good one of the bright young stars in Johnny Gaudreau, Johnny Hockey from right around here in Gloucester County, New Jersey. Oh yeah, they've got second generation close to superstar Matt Tkachuk. Like this Flames team can definitely turn some heads, I think.
Yeah, that D right there will turn a lot of heads. They added Travis Hamonic, like I said, from the New York Islanders, and that bolstered what was already a very strong core. One of the things to look for, though, that might not be, it's not getting a lot of play time right now, but Mark Giordano, he's getting up there in age. Last year, I have to admit, in the games against the Oilers, and I mean, albeit you have McDavid gunning down on you, so anyone looks slow. But he did look a step behind. And defensemen around that age, they can start to take a pretty steep decline. Now, that's not to say that Calgary's D depth is just 4. I mean, they've got some good parts, but that's one thing to watch on the back end there is Mark Giordano. How does he hold up this year? If they call more obstruction penalties, this is a guy who does use his stick a bit. How is that going to affect him? I mean, it could play a factor. That could be sort of a wild card in the Flames defense. What do you think?
Yeah, and you said it best that like Connor McDavid. I mean, you're talking about the reigning MVP of the league, so anyone's gonna look slow compared to him. But you bring up a good point there in terms of like being a step behind. But I mean, the good news for the Flames too is even though he is the captain, he's going to be their leader. He's not going to be on their top pair more than likely. So because of that, like if he at least makes the minutes he's out there count, then you can kind of capitalize in that regard. You know what I mean? Like it's the same thing kind of for like, and obviously these two are kind of different in their skill sets, but like with the Boston Bruins and Zdeno Chara, that's another guy who's up there in age. But guess what? You park him out there, and he's gonna using his massive frame, he's gonna push people around, and when he's up on the point on the offense, especially on the power play, he's gonna fine tune that 100-mile-per-hour slap shot at you. Again, Giordano, a little bit of a different player, not as like top tier necessarily, but I mean, he's wearing the C on his chest for a reason. His teammates believe in him, and he's going to know what's good for the team. Captains in hockey, and you could argue if the captaincy is overrated or not, but the guys who wear the C, they like to put the team first. They like to be able to say, like, okay, like, even if I'm not playing as much as I'd maybe like to, I'm willing to do what helps make this team work. And if he's not seeing first pair minutes, but his team's doing well and they're a surprise in the West this year, yeah, I think he'd be okay with that. I know I would. But what's interesting too about the Flames is, I mean, they now have Mike Smith and Eddie Locke as their two goalies, so it'll be interesting. I think Mike Smith will probably be their starter. But I mean,
Yeah.
Eddie Locke, not a terrible backup. But again, like they've got some offensive pieces. The Flames, I think, if they're doing at least decently well and they're kind of middle of the pack, it would not surprise me if they're come around March for trade deadline, one of the top teams people are talking about to be like, like, let's see what move they can make to try to really bolster that offense and try to give them another like key piece there to be like, all right, like here we are, like now can you take us seriously?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that too. Another thing, it's going to depend on a couple things, I guess, with the Flames. Johnny Gaudreau, you can bank on him having a good year. Where the X factors come in is sort of a Sam Bennett type who was forecasted to, at this point in his career, start to be, to at least be improving, right? And coming off a 26-point year, that's an incredibly disappointing year. So if Sam Bennett has another underwhelming year, then that's where I really see that's where they would probably definitely need scoring help and would be looking at the trade deadline. So he's another person to watch, that sort of X factor, Sam Bennett. And I don't know, 26 points, that shouldn't be too hard to improve off of that, but he's going to have to improve on it quite a bit in order to be the impact player that the Flames are sort of counting on.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see where the Flames stand here because again, if they're great on defense and they have decent goaltending, yeah, that's great, but you got to put the puck in the net too. Otherwise, you're looking at a lot of like 2-1, like 2-0 losses. You know, which that's going to sting a little bit. You need as great as defense is, and as the saying goes, defense can win championships. You need to put the puck in the net too.
They do, and the other big thing that really, I'm not sold on Mike Smith. I'm not. Mike Smith, for years, he was good on a bad Arizona Coyotes team, but this is still a guy that hasn't posted really a remarkable numbers since probably 2011. I think that's the last time they made the playoffs. So I'm really not sold on him. Do I think he's an improvement on Brian Elliott and Chad Johnson last year? Maybe, but I don't know. I almost put him into the same category where I think you're going to get a lot of inconsistency. I think you're going to get some really great games out of Mike Smith, and I think you're going to get some games, as we seen last year, where It doesn't matter about the team in front of him. If he lets a bad goal in, he lets a bad goal in. And I think he's going to be susceptible to that. That doesn't go away with age. That magnifies with age. And Mike Smith is already 35. And so that's another big. And you know what? That perhaps could form the biggest story of the Flame season is the performance of Mike Smith and in turn, the performance of Eddie Lack, who to this point in the preseason hasn't looked too spectacular, but who knows? If they get something like they did last year out of Johnson and Elliott, where both goalies go on a small stretch where they're hot, where they can combine a bunch of wins in a row and then sort of just break even on the rest of the season, then they'll do all right. But it's a risk, let's put it that way.
Oh, no, absolutely. We were actually talking before we went on air about how, like, really, besides, like, Henrik Lundqvist, Carey Price, maybe, like, Corey Crawford, there's not really, and, like, obviously, based on his playoff performance, we can't discount Pecorine. Hey, like, other than that, there's not really a lot of elite goaltenders. In fact, after the first couple of days of free agency, there was a funny picture going around on Twitter of, like, goalie musical chairs of, like, how like goalies kept like switching spots. Like Steve Mason went to Winnipeg. Like Brian Elliott went to Philadelphia, and it was literally just like everybody just rotated. That just goes to show that like there really isn't a lot of like elite goaltending in the NHL right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of inconsistencies and up and down years. You've got some really good goalies. I'd say Cam Talbot, if another year like he did last year, maybe you consider him elite. Martin Jones is a really good goalie, but he's not elite level. Like a lot of just, like you said, players like that who maybe there's some on the cusp. Maybe there's some who have just sort of fallen down back to earth. Aside from that handful that are really game breakers, musical chairs, that's a great reference.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention him, and I should have known this because my team was the silly team that traded him. Sergei Bobrovsky, reigning Vezina winner, and two Vezinas to his name since he's left Philadelphia. So great job, Flyers brass.
That would solve a lot of problems for you, wouldn't it?
No comment. Moving on. Let's move on from Calgary, a team that could push to the playoffs, to a team that went from being the number one seed, we mentioned them a little earlier, to now they made some interesting moves the day of the NHL entry draft, and now it'll be interesting to see what this team can be this year. I'm, of course, talking about the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, I know you're thinking, oh, well, Chicago Blackhawks, like, they'll probably be a top-tier team in the West, and they very well could be. But two really interesting moves on draft day. One, trading Scott Darling to Arizona for Connor Murphy, defenseman, who apparently they're really high on, which people saw that and they were like, wait, huh? Like, for Connor Murphy? Look, all right, sure. What? All right, okay. Well, at least we still have Anthony Panarin, right? No, he gets traded to Columbus. But what's made even more bizarre about that is the fact that this was mainly because Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews apparently went to management. Were like, oh yeah, we want to play with Brandon Saad again. Like we liked when we were playing with him. We want to play with him again. Basically, make it happen. And Chicago Brass was just like, okay, here we go. So Brett, I guess my question is like, what do you think of that? Because to me, like, I mean, I get wanting to appease your top two players. I mean, Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, obviously two of the top probably 15 or 20 players in the league, and that might be even a little like broad. Like maybe I have to shrink that list down a little bit. But I mean, this is almost a LeBron James type move because there's been times where LeBron will influence the Cavs front office to be like, oh, hey, I want this to happen. Sure, here you go. I mean, how keen are you on the inmates running the asylum?
Well, I mean, it's hard to, I guess when you're paying each of these guys $10 million, they do have a considerable amount of say. But if I didn't dislike the trade so much, I probably would be more willing to accept it. But really, I look at Panarin and I go, this guy just won Rookie of the Year. he's clicked like just beautifully with Patrick Kane. I mean, I guess I get there's frustration in Chicago. You get swept out of the playoffs again. I mean, 2 years in a row of just incredibly disappointing performances in the playoffs. I guess I understand that there's frustration and maybe you think that you got to make a move, but is it trading away one of your best young scorers who fits with one of your stars like a glove? Just because, Jonathan Toews and maybe Patrick Kane advocated for it? I don't know. I don't get it. I think it's a little bit silly. I think it's a little bit misguided. But hey, who knows? Sometimes, though, as we see in Edmonton, you trade away the sort of star or a star for more of a something that fits what's needed better, and the whole thing comes together sort of the team first instead of the individual. So who knows?
Are you referencing a certain Taylor Hall trade?
I am referencing a certain Taylor Hall trade. Not to say that the Oilers couldn't have won with him, but
yeah, I get it.
The cogs fit a little bit better otherwise. And who knows, maybe Brandon Saad. Jonathan Toews, Patrick Kane, they're in the Blackhawks dressing room day in, day out. They've got their finger. They're in the pulse of the team. And maybe they're reading it, especially Jonathan Toews. He's leader of that squad. Maybe he just can read it and say, you know what, we need more of this. It's a risk, but hey, not afraid to pull the trigger on such a drastic move.
Yeah, you say maybe it's a risk. I think it's definitely a risk. I don't think they're going to plummet and be a bad team because, I mean, again, there's still a lot of talent on that team. I mean, obviously with Corey Crawford in net, with Duncan Keith leading the defense, with guys like Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, obviously. Mm-hmm. But in the same token, like, it's just, it could just be them hitting the panic button because, like, I mean, you mentioned for the second year in a row they had a disappointing playoffs. Not only did they get swept in the first round by the number 8 seed. Like, so I almost think it's them just hitting the panic button, being like, oh my God, we need to do something, and we need to do it now. But it's so that, and like you said, like one of the game's bright young stars. Now, we'll talk a little bit more tomorrow about like how Panarin could fit with Columbus, because, I mean, if he struggles there, then Blackhawks supporters could just point and be like, see, he was just playing well because Kane was there, and he was the 1A to Patrick Kane, which could be true. But do you really want to bank on that right now? For Brandon Saad, who, while he's a decent player, like when those trades went down, when both of those trades went down, because Scott Darling was a pretty darn good backup for Corey Crawford when Crawford was either hurt or it was just his turn to get a night off or whatever. Both the reaction to both of those trades was just, huh? Like, are you sure? And so this could be maybe, again, not like a fall down and tank kind of year for the Blackhawks, but we talked before we went on air about how back in 2010 they won the Cup, but then to coincide with the cap, they made some moves. Like they most memorable beating, they got rid of Dustin Byfuglien, sending him out to, at the time, the Atlanta Thrashers.
Yeah.
Before they made their move up to Winnipeg, but yeah. So, I mean, will the Blackhawks be a top contender in the West? Maybe, but it'll be interesting to see if these two big moves that, let's face it, were kind of a gamble, how much they pay off. Either it works like gangbusters and Chicago's just as great as ever, or they kind of falter at least a little bit. I mean, they could probably still be a playoff team. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, again, like same thing in the West as is in the East. You've got your top couple teams, and then really anything else could be wide open. But Chicago's kind of a question mark for me this year.
Yeah, I still have them making the playoffs, but when we talk about a team like Nashville and, well, they're going to be right at the top. Well, Chicago's a team that would be supplanted, right? And, maybe they get in a wild card. Maybe they're still in the top 3 in the Central. But I do think that they will make the playoffs. They still got a ton of great pieces there. But big changes in Chicago. We'll know if they work, right? Make the playoffs and what happens in that first round, what happens in that second round. But definitely a lot of question marks. You're right on that.
Yep, and now let's move on to another team that made at least one like big move on draft night, and that's the St. Louis Blues, a team that still has a good amount of weapons, obviously led by Vladimir Tarasenko, one of the top offensive threats in the league, and it's not even close. That guy is pretty much short of Alexander Ovechkin. That guy's one of the most like sure bet offensive threats in the league. But an interesting move they made with my Philadelphia Flyers on draft night was they traded their first round pick and their first round pick for next year, or well, one of their first round picks. They had multiple. One from like this past draft and one for 2018, along with Uri Latera for Braden Shen. Now, Braden Shen, kind of a hit or miss player from Philadelphia last year. While he excelled and I believe either led the league or was second in the league, along with Wayne Simmons in power play goals. Terrible at 5-on-5. Not a great 5-on-5 player at all. And it, like, just go look at the numbers, not pretty. But now, not only did they make the trade for him, which, I mean, hey, if they see promise in Braden Shen, that's great. But also, moving him from wing to center, which was interesting because when he was a center here in Philadelphia, not the best results. I mean, he kind of thrived more at the wing for whatever reason. Guys handle certain positions with whatever like success rate that they're comfortable with. So it's really interesting with this Blues roster. I think it'll be interesting to see if Braden Shen is like that frontline center that they want him to be, along with Vladimir Tarasenko at the wing. But I don't know. It's this Blues roster maybe not as like questionable as we just made the Blackhawks out to be, but the Blues had a good run in the playoffs last year. Now you're just like, can they build on that?
Exactly. And last year they were. It was kind of interesting because I remember all the talk about Kevin Shattenkirk, trade him away at the trade deadline, and they actually got better.
Yeah.
Interesting how that works, but it's really goes to show the depth in St. Louis on their D. And it gave some guys some more minutes, some more time. Pietrangelo, amazing player. But Colton Parayko, a local kid from Edmonton, fantastic player. Really, they're loaded on the back end. And that back end is so good that they made up for having, not the greatest goalies. You got Jake Allen back there, Carter Hutton. It's still made up for it. That the goalies look good because the D had excellent structured team, very well coached. They got Vladimir Tarasenko up front, who's just a demon, a beast, one of the best players in the league. And so they've got strength sort of all across the ice, focused on their D, but everywhere. And I really think that they got 99 points last year. It's tough to get more than 100, but they could actually get more than 100. Like I said, they were better after they traded Kevin Shattenkirk. So who knows? Maybe they build on that momentum. They had a good playoffs and they come out of the gate firing. They closed the season. I think they had 7 wins in their last 10 games. It was 7 or 8. They were ridiculously hot, just on fire. If they get off to a better start than they did last year, you could see this team finishing second in the Central to Nashville. Who knows? Maybe even competing with Nashville for the division. Good things in St. Louis right now.
And I talked to about Braden Shen, he's at least listed right now as a center, but this team actually has some pretty decent center depth. Like you talked about that on defense. They've got pretty decent depth at center too, with guys like Kyle Brodziak, Robbie Fabry, Paul Stastny is one of the alternate captains on this team. They picked up Oscar Sundquist from Pittsburgh. They have pieces that they could kind of mix and match together. So, I remember last year, before the playoffs, we both kind of had the Blues as our dark horse, in the Western Conference, and they're kind of in that similar realm. But you look at this team, the roster, and some of the names of talent, you're this team definitely could, like, I mean, obviously, any team's ideal situation is to get between 90 and 100, maybe more points and be one of the top tier teams in the playoffs. But this is a team that, like, if everything goes right with these pieces and that loaded blue line, yeah, the Blues could definitely be a team that wreaks havoc in the West.
Yeah, they're a very exciting team. Last year they looked absolutely terrific in the playoffs, especially when they faced Minnesota. So I don't know. This is a team that I'm definitely very optimistic on. I like what they have, and I see no reason why they should be diminished at all. So good things in St. Louis.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned it. Like they had a good series against Minnesota where they really cleaned house, and then they ran into Nashville. So, I mean, you run into the team that takes the Penguins to Game 6 in the conference finals. Yeah, I mean, well, in the Cup finals. I mean, yeah, like all in all, like pretty good run. Mike Yeo, a good coach behind the bench, it had to feel really good for him to get the win against Minnesota because obviously the man coached there. But uh, yeah, the Blues, like you, I'm optimistic on. I'm interested to see if this trade works out on both ends for both the Flyers and the Bruins because I think Braden Shen, even if he's just a first line winger along with Tarasenko, he's an upgrade over Yuri Laterra. So
exactly
in that regard, yeah, I can see it. Let's see what happens with the Blues. Now, moving on to a team that I don't know where they'll be in the West this year because I mean they have talent, but who knows what can happen. But I'm more focused on the fact that they cleaned house in their front office and with their coach, and that's the Los Angeles Kings. Bye bye Daryl Sutter. Bye bye. Was Lombardi there last GM?
yes.
He was there for a while. Bye bye Lombardi. Bye bye Daryl Sutter. Hello Rob Blake and John Stevens. John Stevens sees his return to a head coaching job since he was fired from Philadelphia in 2010 before Peter Laviolette took over and took that team to a cup somehow. Anyway, but yeah, so with those new changes, and you still have some of your standout guys, like you still have Anze Kopitar leading the way. You have Jeff Carter, who over the past few years has just really been a lights out scoring forward. You have guys like Drew Doughty on defense and Jake Muzzin. You have Jonathan Quick, who, when he's been hot, I mean, we talked about elite goaltenders. Jonathan Quick's playoff performances when the Kings won their cups are stuff of legend almost. So, with all that in mind, like, a lot of times cleaning house for a team, at least in terms of front office and behind the bench, it could either have a great effect or an effect that's like, oh, well, where do we go from here? And you keep trying to fight to go up and you're only going backwards. So what do you make of the Kings, one, making those front office changes, and two, like, how do you see them fitting?
I think it was due that they made the changes that they did. The thing is, when you switch coaches, it either goes very good, as we've seen with the Penguins last year, or perhaps even it was the year before when they switched coaches, and then bam, win a Stanley Cup. Daryl Sutter coaches a very system-heavy style of hockey, structured, and now you got John Stevens in there, who's not going to be a Sutter type. Very few are in terms of the style of play.
Right.
There's going to be a period of adjustment there where the Kings are going to have to fight through that. Now, it's not like the Kings were very good last year. It didn't help that Jonathan Quick was hurt, and he should be healthy this year. We'll see that will help this team. But there's still going to be a period of adjustment. There's still going to be battling with a roster that isn't as good as the rosters that were winning them Stanley Cups. That's for damn sure.
Right.
Older now, like you said, they still got some very good pieces, and Drew Doughty is the staple of that blue line, and just smart drafting and development and procurement for the Kings is really the roster. They're sort of like the Detroit of old, where even when they were bad, they could still kind of, I mean, not bad, but bad for them. They still had a respectable roster.
Right.
Same thing here with the Kings. But if you're asking me how I think it's all going to flesh out, I think you're going to see a very similar season to last year where they get in that 90-point range and they're sort of just middle of the pack. They have periods of strength and then, periods where just not the LA Kings of old. And I don't see anything special about them. And that's why I'd say I look for them to finish sort of, I guess that would be fifth in the Pacific. That's where I think.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting similar vibes. Like, again, they have good talent, but it doesn't help that a lot of the good talent they have is also kind of getting up there. And like interesting, like little intricacies too. Like I was surprised at one point last year when I learned, oh, Dustin Brown's still on the Kings. Where's the C on his chest? Oh, wait, that goes to Anze Kopitar now. Okay, like that's. I mean, and Dustin Brown was never really a guy to light up the score sheet anyway. But even so, like ever since he's lost that seat, he's almost vanished kind of on that team, which is kind of interesting and might be kind of telling because keep in mind when they won those cups, Dustin Brown was their captain. And again, blah, 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 captaincy could be considered overrated. I totally see that argument. But a lot of times in that locker room, if one guy has the C on his chest, especially for a few years, and if he wins you a couple cups, you're going to follow that guy. Now, I'm sure Dustin Brown has been a good sport about this. And like, Anze's the captain now. All right, I'll just follow his lead. But, like, I'm sure some other guys, well, they're not going to start a mutiny or anything like that, are just going to be like, well, wait a minute. Dustin was captain and we were winning cups. But now Anze's captain. I mean, we'll follow his lead, sure, but it makes you think a little bit. It might cause at least some sort of like hiccup in the mojo, and that could be dangerous. I mean, pretty much all hockey players could be considered head cases in one form or another, but if you mess with their psyche a little bit, like stuff can happen. And again, like we mentioned, age is a factor, injuries are a factor, but I don't know, the Kings, yeah, like you said, they're not the team that was winning cups every other year along with the Blackhawks for a little bit.
No, and that's what I'd expect. Middle of the road, nothing spectacular, nothing too disastrous. Just that'll be it. That's what I think.
Watch, now they're going to go on a run and just run the table the entire year because we said that.
Yeah, exactly.
Expert analysis here, folks.
Yes. Jeez.
We'll talk about one more team before we get to your beloved Edmonton Oilers. I'm going to make you wait a little bit. But we talked about this team, and this team actually will be a very interesting watch this year, and that's the Winnipeg Jets. We talked earlier about goalie musical chairs, goalie roulette, whatever you want to call it. But Steve Mason, former Flyers goalie Steve Mason, now believed to be the starter in Winnipeg for a couple years, which means, guess what, kids? He's probably going to win a Vezina. But a lot of people were saying about this Winnipeg team last year, they have pieces, and they have good pieces. They just need the goalie. Because you've got guys like Patrick Laine, who for a while was a candidate to win the Calder, who had a very good year. Scheifele, who had a very good year, is now an alternate captain on this team, considered one of their leaders. And of course, they have their like front and center leaders, guys like Blake Wheeler, guys like Dustin Byfuglien. But now, as mentioned, they have Steve Mason. Brett, I mean, we've seen Steve Mason be kind of hit or miss, but if he's on his game, could he give Winnipeg the push that they need?
Well, it's a tough one because Steve Mason, like you said, he's not a horrible goalie. He's had some strong years where maybe not the craziest workload, but over 50 games around there where he's put up some good numbers. And it's not like he's going to come into where this Winnipeg Jets defense is just riddled with holes and is just going to give up a million high-scoring chances a game. It's not that. Like you said, you got Dustin Byfuglien back there. You got some guys that can take some good minutes and will give him serviceable minutes. so that he's not getting barraged. Steve Mason gets that. He's firmly got the grasp on that number one job. He might just be able to back this team into a playoff position, which I think is entirely possible. When it, like you said, this team is really good. They've got Patrick Laine on the front end, who last year was just amazing. He'll only get better this year, especially the fact that he won't be injured. Hopefully not for most of the season. You're going to have Patrick Laine, Scheifele, one of the most electric, dynamic players in the league. Just with those two key pieces, that forms that Winnipeg offense. Good defense, like we said. And Steve Mason, the thing with Steve Mason, for this team, it's not even like he'll have to be great or elite or post Vezina numbers, even though he's going to win one now because that's what happened.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
But he wouldn't even have to do that. Average numbers. If he's just average, he'll get this team. He could get them right over the hump and into the playoffs. Who are they gonna supplant? I think the San Jose Sharks. I think they're gonna drop out. I think Winnipeg's gonna be a team to rise up and take a playoff spot. I mean, this was only a team. They were only -7 in goal differential last year. That's one of the best ways to sort of tell how a team goes. That -7, a little bit better goaltending. Well, heck, that can get you close to even. And Calgary Flames made the playoffs last year with +5 goal differentials. So crazier, like worse things have happened. So I'm another team like St. Louis. I'm optimistic that Winnipeg can improve. I really am.
Yeah, I mean, you said it best right there. Like, I think, like you said, if Steve Mason is at least decent, and Scheifele and Laine have great years like they did last year, yeah, look out for Winnipeg because, like Toronto, who we'll talk about tomorrow for sure, add in a couple nice, like, young, healthy, just dynamite pieces to your lineup, and guess what? The whole landscape changes, and you become a force to be reckoned with. So be on the lookout for the Winnipeg Jets. But now, the moment Brett Lickey has been waiting for, time to talk about how these Edmonton Oilers are going to do. Of course, it's boasting the best player in hockey right now. It's pretty hard to argue with Connor McDavid. Little tweaks here and there. They've still got guys like Leon Draisaitl, and guys like Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, and still a decent defensive core with Darnell Nurse, Adam Larson, etc. But Brett, like, I believe the main changes, it was Eberle who got traded, correct?
Yes, Jordan Eberle straight up for Ryan Strome of the New York Islanders.
Mm-hmm. So, interesting moves. Like, people outside of Edmonton, like, kind of looking and be like, like, interesting. Let's see if Edmonton can kind of recreate what they had. Brett, well, I'm just going to say go, pretty much.
You know, I was a fan of that trade. If you had any sort of access to my living room during the playoff run, you'd know that Jordan Eberle's name was not thrown around kindly in my household. There's only so many times you can miss a check, fail to back check, just ultimately not give your full effort, where the fans aren't going to get a little bit tireless. And I know Peter Chiarelli, watching that playoff series, got just tired of it, just done. And so, not to diss on Jordan Eberle, he had a very, for considering what the teams that he played on, he had a solid Oilers career, scored a bunch of goals, crazy amount of good plays. But this team has evolved. Jordan Eberle wasn't with that any further, or couldn't be with that any further. He moved on. And that's the biggest part of this Edmonton Oilers team, is that, yes, they are evolved. Last year, we've seen it happen. Up till about January, they were a 50-50 hockey club finding their ways. And then, bam, in the new year, they found their way. And it led them to a 103-point season. Now, this was something like their best season since like 1988, 1986. Insane to think about, but that's where we're at. Does it hurt that the Oilers have lost Andrei Sekera, probably their number 3 defenseman? Of course, that guy was stellar for the team last year. But Do I see that there's going to be a big drop off? No. If Andre Sekera is the difference between a 103-point season and an 88-point season, there's something else wrong with the team. So I think Matthew Benning, who's a terrific college signing from last year, who had an amazing rookie year last year for the Oilers, I think he's going to fill into that number 4 role with Chris Russell. And other than that, like I said, Jordan Eberle changed with Ryan Strome. Even if Ryan Strome doesn't do much, he'll be about the same as what the year Eberle had last year. So this is pretty much the same roster. Connor McDavid, you might see Kyler Yamamoto. He's having a hell of a preseason. For those that don't know or don't really remember, he's the 5'8" guy that the Oilers drafted 22nd overall. He's got 5 goals already this preseason. Guy's very small, battles hard. He might make the roster. So lots to still like in Edmonton. Cam Talbot had an amazing year last year, breakout year. I don't see any reason why that'll change. Look for him to get a heavy workload, probably 65 starts this year. He had 71 last year. It's going to be a very good year in Edmonton again. Maybe a little bit of a slower start than maybe one would expect because of the Sekera injury, but I think as soon as I think they'll gel, Sekera should be back right around the new year, maybe a little bit earlier. And from there, I think that's when the rubber will really hit the road. They're going to close out with another strong season. And seriously, do not be surprised if you see the Oilers take the Pacific this year. They were only 2 points shy of it last year. To the Ducks. I wouldn't be surprised if they could take the Pacific.
All right, I want you to rewatch that part where you said that it could be a slower start many times. That way, come like November when you're screaming at your TV if there is a slow start, you could be like, okay, at least I expected this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know that if it did happen, I won't be thinking rationally like that. I'll be like, oh, the world's ending. But
of course,
maybe you could send me. I'll send it to you. You send it back to me.
just dock it off that part, like just on loop. It might be a slow start. It might be a slow start. Like just like Clockwork Orange. It's just like, all right, yeah, I got it now. All right, so all right. Well, I think that about wraps it up here for the Western Conference preview, because hockey previews are always kind of interesting. Like this offseason, like some interesting stuff happened, but really like, and it'll pretty much be more of the same in the East. Like hockey, like it's kind of hard unless like even the Stanley Cup champions might not look like fantastic in preseason. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it seems like a lot more of an even playing field.
Yeah, it is. There's a lot more parity, and the NHL. It's not like the NBA, the super team league, where in the offseason you see these crazy movements because the superstars are aligning to 3 or 4 different teams.
Right.
You don't really get that in the NHL. I mean, I know that the Pittsburgh Penguins have won the last 2 cups, but if you look at the teams that have made the playoffs and the turnover, like you said, there's a great amount of parity in the league, and that's what makes it such a great league is that, heck, the Nashville Predators can come up and they can make the Stanley Cup Finals. And who knows, maybe this year, maybe it's the Oilers, or who knows, maybe it's Toronto Maple Leafs. It could be, I mean, such an exciting time. And I really look forward to talking about the East tomorrow night. So for everyone interested.
Tomorrow night around 9 or so Eastern time. Again, we'll somewhere in that ballpark, we will talk not only Pittsburgh Penguins, but you mentioned the Toronto Maple Leafs. I know discussion of my Philadelphia Flyers will seep its way in there somehow, and we'll figure out a couple other teams to talk about in the East to say like, hey, like, where's this team going? Because I like the ground we covered tonight with teams of like, oh yeah, this team should be looking up like St. Louis, or oh, like this team, like the Kings, like, oh, I don't know if I like how this team looks. Teams like the Blackhawks, where you're like, oh, it's kind of that question mark. So yeah, we'll be sure to do the same breakdown here with the East tomorrow. Sound good?
Perfect. Sounds good.
All right. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Tyler from Unlimited, and thanks for watching.